This is the Art of Darkness podcast with Kevin Kautzman.
And Brad Kelly. We're a couple of very online writers interested in the dark side of what drives creative people to create against all odds.
This show is about art and the people who make it, what it costs them, and what it takes to bring something unique and impactful into the world.
Each episode, we excavate the life and work of an artist you might think you know.
Don't worry, they're all safely dead.
On every episode, we try and find out just what the hell was wrong with them and how they worked through their darkness to create something that lives on after them and continues to move culture.
Find us online at artofdarkpod.com and on Twitter at artofdarkpod. All right, we've got some sponsors for the pod now.
Wait, what?
Every link you need for the things we talk about here is at artofdarkpod.com/sponsors. First up, books.
If you're into this podcast, odds are you're probably a reader. We've got links to buy new books from bookshop.org and used books from alibris.com.
And if you want to listen to your books, we recommend and use audible.com.
It's great, and the catalog is huge.
All right. So if you're listening to this, you are online.
Maybe you're very online.
You probably have a website or are thinking of starting one. Maybe you want a website like artofdarkpod.com. We built that with WordPress, which is by far the most popular way to create websites. And the single best host for serious WordPress is WP Engine. I've personally used them for over a decade now, and I don't host my websites anywhere else. Go to artofdarkpod.com/sponsors and click on the WP Engine link to learn more.
Finally, the best way to support the show is at patreon.com/artofdarkpod. Get the bonus After Dark content for every episode, access to the book club, and more.
Thanks for supporting Art of Darkness. And I don't think that was too painful. I think we did a pretty good job there.
Yeah, that sounded good.
Yeah, we appreciate it. We're back. Another episode of Art of Darkness, the podcast about the dark side of creativity. I'm Kevin Kautzman here in St. Paul, Minnesota, joined by my partner in crime, Brad Kelly. Brad, how are you?
I'm doing pretty good, Kevin. Ready to I get to be on the receiving end.
Sure.
So I'm the fish. I'm the, what is it? Fish out of water, new guy in town, whatever that narrative technique is. I'm that guy. So that's always fun.
Yeah. You're the guy who strolls into the biking bar and starts to hit on the boss's daughter.
Well, no, I don't want to be that guy. That sounds terrible.
Nope. That's you today, Brad.
All right.
This is where we are today, too, fellas. That's the thing.
Okay.
That's
All
it.
right.
And that is friend of the show, poet Jason Gallagher. Brad, you want to introduce Jason?
Yeah, Jason Gallagher, for people who've been listening for a while. Jason joined us on the episode we did about the life and work of John Berryman. He's here today to help us with Charles Bukowski, which we're talking about that if you've clicked on the link. Jason is a poet who's had work in a number of literary journals. He teaches English at Maryville University and the University of Missouri St. Louis, where he is working on his MFA. He at one time was one of the last contributing editors to the Great Evergreen Review, currently on the board of literary magazine Boulevard. Correct me if any of this has changed.
Yep.
And he, to my understanding, also has, Jason, you finished your manuscript for your collection? Yep. Excellent. Yep. Do you have a name for it? I mean, somebody might try to make you change it, but do you know what you're calling it?
I want to change it. I don't like the name right now.
Okay, well, don't even tell us then.
So yeah, I'm really, that's the thing that's sort of taking most of my creative time, is like thinking of a new name. So that's funny.
Titles are hard. Kevin and I have two totally different approaches to titles, I think, in terms of our career. It's like, for me, there's just like a moment where you're like, oh, well, that's obviously the title. Like you struggle with it and fight with it. And then at one point you're like, oh, how did I not figure this out 6 months ago? But so I wish you luck with that.
Begin if I don't have a title.
Right.
The title may change, but I can't begin. Yeah.
Interesting.
Well, congratulations on finishing that, Jason. Where can people find you before we get into it? Just plug your.
I am not on the Bird website, much to your chagrin, Kevin. I have I've avoided it for about a year now, but I picked up some interest on my Instagram. That's just my name backwards, Gallagher Jason, Gallagher, and then my first name. I've had some fans of the show actually contact me, which is exciting.
Cool. That
So
is cool.
that's let's get started on today's topic.
Let's
Yeah.
do
Oh,
it.
yeah.
I love
Yeah.
it. We've got a lot to cover today, and
Yeah.
I'm afraid we're going to be painfully inappropriately sober on this episode.
Speak for
Uh,
yourself, Kevin. No,
yeah.
I'm just kidding.
And
Yeah.
to prepare, I threw some money on the ponies. I'm not going to tell you how much I lost, and I've only eaten candy bars for the past week.
Oh, good. Good. You're in
So
perfect condition for this.
This is going to be great. And of course, today our subject is Charles Bukowski. I got to say before we get into it, Telegram t.me/Art of Dark Pod. We've got a very lively chat there. A lot of fun every time we drop an episode. People talk about it, but also just generally people talk about all sorts of things. That's fun. Get on the twitter.com/Art of Dark Pod. Brad mans that. And of course, the very best way to support this podcast, as you're just about to hear, I don't know how many hours about Charles Bukowski, is patreon.com/Art of Dark Pod. We will promote that a little more in a second. Brad, as we always begin, what do you know about Charles Bukowski?
I know a fair amount. People generally refer to him first as a poet, but he also wrote a number of novels and other pieces of prose. Born in Germany, I want to say, but it was a sort of a military-based situation, if I remember right, because he's certainly an American. Affiliated with Los Angeles primarily. Was a post He was either a postman or worked in the post office. I'm not sure what the difference is between those two, if there is one, for a long time. Didn't get recognized as a writer for a long time. And I feel like, and I don't know the details of this, I feel like there was the publisher of an independent journal who kind of like put all the money on Bukowski at one point. Something like that. I don't know. I don't know the details, but I remember something like that. And then Bukowski went on a series of tours and became a sort of a mini celebrity in like the last 10 years of his life, maybe a little bit longer than that. Yeah, that's kind of what I know. Definitely like known for like the seedy side, cigarettes and sleeping on the floor and women and gambling and all of that stuff.
Right. Yeah, and I said before we started recording that on this Bukowski episode, I am prepared to acknowledge that there may be the slightest minuscule quantum of truth to the idea of toxic masculinity.
Oh, okay. Hashtag
Right.
toxic masculinity.
Hashtag, yeah, not all poets. But what's
Right.
very funny, too, is that he's very, very divisive. People have very strong feelings about Bukowski, certainly a bit misunderstood, but also an arch obvious topic for Art of Darkness, and somebody who people have asked for, and that it's sort of a foregone conclusion that we would cover. I read an awful lot of Bukowski just before I had met you, Brad, down in grad school. So quite a while ago. So we're not just sort of chasing clout by doing this. Like, I have a legitimate respect and admiration for Bukowski, and I would even say his poetry in particular influenced the way that I wrote plays, in the sense that he's very, very free, very liberated. I see Jason's nodding here. Do you co-sign that, Jason?
Yeah, absolutely. I think one of the things we're going to talk about is how Bukowski is unable to be easily pigeonholed amongst the major poetic movements of the mid-century. Like, he's not what fits easily into this box or that box. And a lot of it has to do with the freeness of his verse. His verse is terse. His lines are often very short. And I have, in my own research and reading, I sort of have my pet theory of why that is, and we can talk about that in a little bit. But Bukowski his own poet. And I find it interesting, Kevin, you were talking about reading Bukowski in grad school. My first go round in grad school, he was kind of a persona non grata.
Sure.
And I don't even think it's because of sort of what we're talking about with divisiveness. I think that there was a time I did my undergrad in the early 2000s when all the male poets in my program wanted to be Charles Bukowski. Mm-hmm. I even remember one of my professors saying we have to sort of find other writers.
There are other poets, guys. There's other poets. Right. Yeah. He's not the only one.
But I feel that in many ways, there's a little bit of sadness, I think, in my own sort of relationship with Bukowski, because I did avoid him for a long time, not necessarily because of the baggage, but just because of what I had known from undergrad. And in all actuality, Bukowski is a great model for a lot of young poets. And that's what I find really fascinating, particularly as poetry has sort of moved over the last 20, 25 years. I think that a lot of people should go back and actually read him. We can talk about that a little later.
Yeah, he's one of these people where you have an idea of what he is, and then you open up one of the books of poetry and you may be totally shocked by what you find. And so we'll try to give a taste of that during this episode. Before we do, just a bit of housekeeping. So prior, again, to recording, Brad and I agreed that every single subject we cover is an absolute endorsement of their entire lives. That's super important. I'm kidding, of course.
I don't even endorse. I only halfway endorse my own life. I don't know how I'm supposed to sign on for.
And that shows, Brad. That comes across. You can be proud of that. That's very good. But I also just. Before we start talking about the Patreon and the After Dark episode, if you subscribe to the Patreon, you get an extra episode for every episode we do, another 20, 30 minutes. Before I do, we just have to pause and say here on Sunday, June 18th, in the foul year of our Lord 2023, we just got to give 5 seconds to Cormac McCarthy.
Yeah.
All right. Now, this podcast... Yeah, this podcast does not ambulance chase. I've said it before. We're not going to talk about him at least until a year and a day after. We'll probably do an episode. We have the Blood Meridian special planned for December.
Yeah, that's been planned for months. Yeah.
Yeah, with the great Aaron Gwynn. And that'll be all the information about that is at the website and on the Patreon. We're not going to change that. We're very excited. That'll probably be a little different now, maybe a little more somber, but also enthusiastic, because what a joy to know we have that to look forward to. And of course, Aaron Gwynn he wrote an obituary for Cormac, I think in the Spectator.
I think that's right.
Yeah, I don't even know if you call it an obituary, but he eulogized him.
Yeah.
An elegy. There you are. Mm-hmm. And so we're just very much looking forward to that. And I felt like I just had to make a little room for Cormac.
Yeah, I appreciate that. Yeah, it's you speak of the people who, Jason, you speak as a poet encountering Bukowski, and so many people you knew were trying to emulate Bukowski. For me, there wasn't everybody, but there was enough of us that were trying to be Cormac McCarthy for a while. And so, losing him, it's tricky, I'm not going to pour my heart out over it, but it affected me, unlike most passings. So
the last thing we'll say about that right now is, depending on how highly you rank the arts and letters, and of course, on Art of Darkness, we rank them very, very highly. It isn't just that we lost, pretty much by consensus, the greatest living American writer. We may have lost the greatest living American. Mm-hmm. One of the very short list. So just had to make room for that. And there'll be a lot more Cormac talk to come. But for now, we're going to talk about Charles Bukowski. And I got to tease the After Dark, patreon.com/Art of Dark Pod. We put in the work. These episodes don't prepare themselves. There's no other show like this. We are trying to get to half a Crowley this year, 333 patrons. We're getting there. Everybody who signs up, I literally feel like you're pulling with us. When I see a sign up, seriously, this is serious independent media, right? We don't have a Spotify deal. We have a lot of listeners on Spotify. We don't have a deal. Nobody's throwing us money. So you get a chance to do it. And on this After Dark, and we always prepare something juicy and fun for After Dark, and I've got some good stuff. So Jason and I have prepared a bit about the controversy surrounding Bukowski's poetry in posthumous publications and how heavily they've been edited.
Oh, okay.
There's something, and yeah, Jason and I are going to talk about that. We're going to talk about when he met R. Crumb, which should be fun. They had a little collaboration. We're going to talk about Bukowski's love of cats. He loved cats, and Jason's going to read a Bukowski cat poem.
Oh,
and I don't normally prepare 4 topics for the After Dark, but this is a big one. We're going to talk about Bukowski's FBI file.
Oh, nice. I like it.
Always the good one.
It's on the bingo card.
Put that on the bingo card. Both the post office and the FBI took exception to Hank. Now I got to mention source material. It'll be obvious when we're reading from the poems. Obviously, it's sort of like the collected works. He wrote a ton, but I've got 2 biographies principally. I've got this great biography by Tchaikovsky, just called Bukowski. That reads like a novel. And then I have a bit more of an episodic biography from Howard Sounds, Charles Bukowski, Locked in the Arms of a Crazy Life. So that's what I'm doing. And with Jason's able help, he's going to be reading an awful lot of poetry. And I think I might close it out with a poem, or a poem, as they say, Brad. We're going to start at the end. Brad, do you know what Bukowski had put on his gravestone? What's on Bukowski's
I believe
grave?
it is "Don't try."
Don't try. So let's remember that as we get into the bio. All right.
I have thoughts on that, but we don't have to talk about it now.
Well, we'll talk about it at the end. How about that? All right. So let's go. We're going to get into the biography. Henry Charles Bukowski was born Heinrich Karl Bukowski in Germany on August 16th, a Leo, of 1920. He was an American poet, novelist, and short story writer. His writing was influenced by the social, cultural, and economic ambiance of his adopted home city of LA. Now, this is Wikipedia. We'll be getting into the books a bit. As Brad stated, his work addresses the ordinary lives of poor Americans, the act of writing, alcohol, relationships with women, and the drudgery of work. I did mention that the FBI kept a file on him. We'll go into that further in the After Dark for Patreon, but that was a result of a column that he had in an underground newspaper called Open City called Notes of a Dirty Old Man. And that really did contribute to his fame. That got some circulation. We'll get into it. This just gives the overview here. Let me see here. All right. So we've got, he was very widely published in the small literary magazines. There's an excellent biography of him, a documentary biography that you can watch after you listen to the Art of Darkness episode and the After Dark called Born Into This. Have you seen that, Brad?
I have seen Born Into This. Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah.
So that gives you kind of a broad look at his stuff. That's a very good documentary to watch about his life. They called him the king of the little magazines. And he started publishing in the early 1940s, all through the 90s. He didn't give up on those. He kept sending them out, He wrote thousands of poems, hundreds of short stories, and 6 novels. And he published over 60 books during the course of his career, which is wild.
That's a lot.
Yeah. All right. So let's get into the family and early life. So he was born Heinrich Karl Bukowski in Andernach, Prussia in Weimar, Germany. His father was Heinrich Henry Bukowski, an American of German descent, an Amerikaner who had served in the U.S. Army of Occupation after World War I and had remained in Germany after his army service. His mother was Katharina. Her maiden name was Fett. His paternal grandfather, Leonard Bukowski, had moved to the U.S. from Imperial Germany in the 1880s. In Cleveland, Ohio, a lot of Krauts out there. Yeah. In Cleveland, Ohio, Leonard met Emily Kraus, an ethnic German who had emigrated from Danzig in Poland. They married and settled in Pasadena, California, where Leonard worked as a successful carpenter. The couple had 4 children, including Heinrich. This would be Hank Bukowski's father. His father. His mother, Katharina Bukowski, was the daughter of Wilhelm Fett and Nanette Israel. Now, the name Israel, and I did not know this, is widespread among Catholics, the one true faith, in the Eifel region. Okay, interesting. That's a very curious fact.
It is, yeah.
Bukowski assumed his paternal ancestor had moved from Poland to Germany around 1780, as Bukowski is a Polish last name.
Right.
As far back as Bukowski could trace, his whole family was German. And we just had a nice pop-up on the arts books charts in Deutschland. So hello, Deutschland, wie geht's? Yeah, just in time for this, because I know he's quite a figure in Germany.
Is he really? Okay.
Yeah. Bukowski's parents met in Andernach following World War I. His father was German-American and a sergeant in the U.S. Army serving in Germany after the Empire's defeat. Okay. He had an affair with Katharina, a German friend's sister, and she became pregnant. Okay, well, and I assume there's some shotguns lying around, and it being when it was, you can about imagine what happened after that. Bukowski repeatedly claimed to be born out of wedlock, but Andernach marital records indicate that his parents married 1 month before his birth. Let's go.
Yeah.
Afterwards, Bukowski's father became a building contractor set to make great financial gains in the aftermath of the war. And after 2 years, moved the family to Pfaffendorf, today part of Koblenz. However, given the crippling post-war reparations being required of Germany, which of course we know were totally just and didn't lead to any further problems, they were dealing with a stagnant economy and high levels of inflation. He was rubbing my chin here. He was what could go wrong? Bukowski's father was unable to make a living and decided to move the family to the U.S. So in April of 1923, they sailed from Bremerhaven to Baltimore, Maryland, where they settled. Now, I've got a little bit about Hank's mother here from the Bukowski life, and that's the book I'll principally be reading from. We've got some interesting stuff here. This is quite good. I'm going to call her Catherine. It probably would have been pronounced Katharina. Catherine rarely said much concerning growing up in Germany or about her family. Without warning, she would sometimes tell Hank random stories. One concerned her grandfather. He was an accomplished musician who drank a lot of beer. According to her, he went from bar to bar playing the violin, holding his hat out for tips. As soon as he had earned enough money, he stepped to the bar and began drinking. As the evening progressed, he would be thrown out of one bar for being disorderly and move on to the next and the next. Hank liked this story very much and felt sure that his great-grandfather must have been equal to Leonard Bukowski, another drinker. He began to think that the older generations of his family must have really been special. Catherine barely knew English when she arrived in the States. As Hank said in later years, my father was conqueror of her nation, a hero. In a sense, he ruled over her. Rarely, if ever, did she contradict his various edicts. Henry Bukowski didn't just beat his son as the boy grew older, but he also inflicted physical punishment on his wife as well. So we're getting into the abuse in his childhood. He had a Dickensian isn't even a word for his childhood. He had a torturous childhood. And that'll figure heavily in this biography, in this profile that we do.
Hmm.
When things were really tough during the Depression, Hank says, my old man would often beat my mother. I tried to stop him a few times, but then after beating away at her, he would start on me. All right. So there you go. We'll get a little bit of a taste of what's to come.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, you have to imagine his mother's own childhood and how the father is right. The father is the law of the house, right? And corporal punishment was not as wildly out of line as we might think of it today. I think everyone knows this, but it's just worth restating.
Right.
All right.
And throughout Ham on Rye, it's really interesting because the mother will call the father daddy as the term of endearment throughout the novel. It's really difficult to read that novel and hear the biography because there is such a thin veil of fictionalization within the novel that's hard to really separate, because every single thing that you said, Kevin, is a portion of a chapter in the first 2/3 of that novel.
Absolutely. And of course, Ham on Rye is the autofiction biographical novel, and we'll come to it very shortly. We're going to read from it. But that was not one of his early novels. And it does feel more mature than Post Office and Factotum. And they do mention in Born Into This, the documentary, his wife, Linda, I think, mentions how difficult it was for him to finally arrive at the point where he could write that. And Ham on Rye, if you've not read it, if you're going to read one Bukowski novel, personally, I think that's the one to read.
I agree.
Because it's just soaking with blood and truth. I find his novels to be fun. They're fun, weird, light reads, except for Ham on Rye. Yeah. Ham on Rye is like, oof, ouch. All right. So good. So they're in Baltimore. His family moved to Mid-City, LA in 1930. His father was often unemployed. And in Ham on Rye, Bukowski says that with his mother's acquiescence, his father was frequently abusive, both physically and mentally, beating his son for the smallest imagined offense. There's a passage, and I don't know if we'll come to it in Ham on Rye, but where his father would make him mow the lawn. And if there was a single blade of grass out of line, he'd get a beating. His father would get on his hands and knees. And you can just imagine probably $1 million house now in LA, but like or 800, but just like a middle class, tiny little house in sort of central LA. And dad is on his hands and knees, looking, and is there one blade of grass that's high? Yeah, very, very heavy. So he would beat him for the smallest offense. Hank would later tell in an interview that his father beat him with a razor strop 3 times a week from the ages of 6 to 11 years. And he does say that it helped his writing because he came to understand undeserved pain.
Oh, God.
All right. And I know Jason has some excerpts from Ham on Rye for us. So you ready with those, Jason?
Yep.
Get it.
I like to stay in bed for hours, even during the day with the covers pulled up to my chin. It was good in there. Nothing ever occurred in there. No people, nothing. My mother often found me in bed in the daytime. Henry, get up. It's not good for a young boy to lay in bed all day. Now get up, do something. But there was nothing to do. I didn't go to bed that day. My mother was reading the note. He had just gotten in trouble for talking back to one of his teachers, and he had sent this note home. I think he's probably in the 3rd or 4th grade at this point in the novel. Soon I heard her crying. Then she was wailing, "Oh my God, you've disgraced your father and myself. It's a disgrace. Suppose the neighbors find out. What will the neighbors think?" They never spoke to their neighbors. Then the door opened and my mother came running into the room. "How could you have done this to your mother?" The tears were running down her face. I felt guilty. "Wait until your father gets home. She slammed the bedroom door, and I sat in the chair and waited. Somehow, I felt guilty. I heard my father come in. He always slammed the door, walked heavily, and talked loudly. He was home. After a few moments, the bedroom door opened. He was 6'2", a large man. Everything vanished. The chair I was sitting in, the wallpaper, the walls, all of my thoughts. He was the dark covering the sun. The violence of him made everything else utterly disappear. He was his ears, nose, mouth. I couldn't look at his eyes. There was only his red, angry face. All right, Henry, into the bathroom. I walked in and closed the door behind us. The walls were white. There was a bathroom mirror and a small window, the screen black and broken. There was the bathtub and the toilet and the tiles. He reached and took down the razor stroop which hung from a hook. It was going to be the first of many such beatings, which would occur more and more often, always, I felt, without real reasons. All right, take down your pants. I took my pants down. Pull down your shorts. I pulled them down. Then he laid on the stoop. The first blow inflicted more shock than pain. The second hurt more. Each blow which followed increased the pain. At first, I was aware of the walls, the toilet, the tub. Finally, I couldn't see anything. As he beat me, he berated me, and I couldn't understand the words. I thought about his roses, how he grew roses in the yard. I thought about his automobile in the garage. I tried not to scream. I knew that if I did scream, he might stop. But knowing this, and knowing his desire for me to scream, prevented me. The tears ran from my eyes as I remained silent. After a while, it all became just a whirlpool, a jumble, and there was only the deadly possibility of forever. Finally, like something jerked into action, I began to sob, swallowing and choking on the salt slime that ran down my throat. He stopped.
Yeah, that's good. Thank you for reading that.
Yeah.
Well,
yeah.
that's plenty of ham on rye.
It sounds like it's almost like and this isn't meant to demean it at all. There's like a police report quality to it almost. This feels like, yeah, ugh, wow. That's a tough household.
Right. And I wonder where we're going to talk about style at some point, because, there are certain benchmarks that he is aligning himself with that goes to that reportage nature of a lot of the fiction. Well, and a lot of the poetry too. It's not just the fiction that is like that. I would say that the poetry too is a very sort of form of reportage, and he's going back and forth because a lot of this material, Ham on Rye was 89. If you read some of the poems in Love is a Dog from Hell, which came out in the late 70s, he's covering a lot of the same ground just in poems. So there's this back and forth as he moves the material in between genres. And in my opinion, I think he does it very effortlessly, where the poems are as effective as the fictionalization is, but it's still mining that same well with a lot of his best writing.
And it's a deep well. I mean, that's some near infinite pain to explore for sure.
Yeah. Well, we'll circle back around to it, I'm sure. So this is a little bit more from him talking about the beating, and I think this is interesting. Well, here, this is the one. This is the business about the getting back to the lawn. So he takes a beating, and then the thing his father says is, next time I don't want to find any hairs. So if he's to be believed, he's getting these beatings over the lawn not being mowed properly. Right. So, all right, as you can imagine, this tumultuous and troubled childhood significantly influenced his work. We're seeing that already. They make a point here that he often did exaggerate and embellish aspects of his life. So we have to take him at his word. It's not like his father put pen to paper and said, yes, I beat my son every day or 3 times a week for 5 or 6 years. But where there's smoke, there's fire, I think. And we don't have any reason to doubt Bukowski's truth, I guess. I don't see why you would play this up too much. What's to be gained from that?
Right.
This isn't the stuff that made him famous, I don't think.
Yeah.
Ham on Rye came in 1989, was that right, Jason?
Yeah.
He was already very famous at that point and successful and living off his writing. So going on in the bio, his parents struggled with poverty, and so there was a lot of tension in the family. They had meager living conditions. And of course, as a child, Bukowski despaired, as you can about imagine. He was also frequently bullied and ridiculed by his classmates due to his German heritage. I don't know what that's about. And his family's poverty. These experiences of social isolation and mistreatment further contributed to his growing darkness and cynicism. Another aspect of his troubled childhood was his strained relationship with his mother, who often served as a source of emotional turmoil. She would berate him, dismiss his artistic inspirations, and reinforce his feelings of worthlessness. So not only is dad physically abusive, mom is kind of backing dad up, and you're just completely left on an island. Now,
yeah, that's helpless. There's no siblings, right?
Right.
Yeah, so this little boy is just alone in this. That's,
right.
That's you can't. Oh, and no friends either, or very few. If he's being bullied constantly, he's the outcast. So that's I'm feeling bad for young Bukowski here for sure.
Yeah, it's not easy by any stretch.
And it's also I'm sorry, Kevin. It's also
go on.
heart. It's also the heart of the Depression as well. And there's a moment that he recounts again in Ham on Rye of every child in the classroom making up an occupation for their father. And he says that, someone said that one father worked on a movie lot, another one was a lawyer, and he made up an occupation for his father. And then the last kid in the classroom speaks up and says, my dad's unemployed. And the Bukowski character is like, why wasn't I able to do that? Why wasn't I able to just say that this is what is going on in my life? I wish I could have been that honest. So there's a lot of, it's growing up poor in a time that is associated with bleakness and poverty, which I think is really fascinating.
Yeah, and at the very edge of the world too. And this is not like a pastoral Midwestern childhood. This is in LA. And I feel like he may have had a sibling. He might have had a brother, but it's not mentioned it's not brought up a lot if he did. In any case, we'll press on here. I've got something about a shining light of hope in his life, which would be, of course, writing. So we're in 5th grade here in LA. Hank's 5th grade teacher explained to her class that President Herbert Hoover was slated to appear at the Coliseum in Exposition Park, a few miles south of downtown LA and next to the USC campus. This is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, she told them. You and your parents should attend this event as a civic duty. She asked them each to write essays about the momentous occasion. Hank didn't go, but he wrote about Hoover anyway. He put many details into his essay, like how the president stood ramrod straight, how he waved to the crowds, and how his voice boomed over the sound system. He described the excited populace of LA assembled there, cheering their president. When the essays were handed in, the teacher read each dutifully and told the students, there is one bit of writing here about the visit of our president to the Coliseum written by Henry Bukowski. It is so beautiful, and I want to read it to you. The kids turned and looked his way. They found it difficult to believe that the class oddball, the outsider, the loner, had been singled out for his writing ability. Once the class settled down, the teacher began reading his story. As the other students left class, Hank's teacher asked him to stay behind. She questioned whether he had actually been present when President Hoover gave his address. Cornered, he admitted that he had not been there. Rather than being angry, the teacher said that this fact made his essay all the more remarkable, and that she was very impressed. Hank, as young as he was, realized then that people wanted beautiful lies, not the truth. That's what they needed. People were fools. This impression became central to his way of thinking from that time onward. That was the first time Hank believed he was a writer. Yet rather than being encouraged to write more, he simply drew back, although it impressed him to see that all the kids in his class, even the prettiest girls and the top athletes, stared at him with admiration when the teacher finished reading his essay. Even he almost believed that he had been at the Colosseum.
Okay. All right.
There's some power in writing. I tell you what. I tell you who what. Yeah, and he was. I'm like 99% sure he was an only child.
Okay.
Yeah.
There's some rumor of like maybe a half brother or something, but in any case, there's not a. And you're right to point that out, Brad. Very lonely, very sad childhood for Hank.
Yeah.
Well, and his parents also isolated him as well, where he was kept away from the other kids in the neighborhood. In fact, he recounts that he did not know any other child until kindergarten because his mother and father would keep him inside the house. So, there's a degree of extreme social isolation there.
Sure. And an accent. And his mother doesn't have very great English. And Germans aren't the most popular ethnic group in the United States. I hate to tell you.
Yeah.
Never have been. And so forth. Well, he's growing up a little bit, and he makes a friend named Frank, a little friend. He always kind of he's a social guy. We'll see. I mean, he eventually frequents bars, and he's like anybody else. He's not some crazy introvert who just needs to be at his computer all day. He needs people like anybody else. So he makes a little friend, and the friend's name is Frank, and Frank's family belonged to the Catholic Church. This is very interesting. So young Hank attended catechism classes at St. Agatha's Church on West Adams Boulevard. The church was within walking distance from Longwood Avenue, and Hank began going there with his friend. His parents approved of it and encouraged this, and his father said, maybe this will straighten him out. I want to give this because this is about the only religiosity we're going to get out of his life, right? Catechism class interested Hank. He enjoyed passing the time discussing religion with Frank. Little did he know that a man destined to be perhaps the greatest influences on his own work, John Fonte, had undergone. Are you familiar with John Fonte, Brad?
No, I don't. I don't know who John Fonte is.
Okay, well, he was very influential. Jason, do you know much about John Fonte?
I don't know much about John.
Fonte. Brad, look it up while you're while I'm reading. So John Fonte had undergone a Catholic upbringing in Boulder, Colorado, and would write a book about it called Dago Red. This book was destined to be one of Hank's favorite pieces in his junior college days. When he read the descriptions of the nuns, the priests, the confession box, and the religious classes, he thought of those days with Frank Sullivan attending the parish church. When a priest told Hank and his friend that animals could not go to heaven because they didn't have souls and therefore could not be baptized, the two boys didn't take this disturbing news well. Instead, they found a dog near the church, brought him inside, and sprinkled him with holy water. Gradually, the novelty of Catholicism and its mysteries wore off, and Hank became bored. He decided that the regimentation and dogma didn't suit him, nor did he like a God who seemed so much like his father. After 2 weeks of skipping classes, the church sent two girls of Hank's age, blonde, blue-eyed, and dressed in flowery blouses, to see him. He told the girls that he didn't want to return to the catechism class, and that was the end of his flirtation with organized religion. It's impossible to imagine Bukowski going to mass every Sunday, or even like as an Easter mass Catholic. It's really hard to picture, but yeah, just a little bit of a moment.
Yeah. So I got a little on John Fonte just for the audience and you guys. John Fonte, born in 1909, Denver, Colorado. In his mid-20s, he hitchhikes to California, ends up writing what is often considered the great Los Angeles novel, which is 1939's Ask the Dusk. It's part of a quartet of novels about Los Angeles. And Ask the Dusk was turned into a film with Colin Farrell and Salma Hayek in 2006. Some affiliation with H.L. Mencken of all people. Yeah, I'm surprised I've never heard of this guy.
Yeah, me too.
I had definitely heard the name before, but I think in the context of Bukowski as him being
he's been considered a precursor to the beat writers. So interesting. Robert Towne,
future Art of Darkness subject.
Yeah, potentially.
Throw him on the spreadsheet, Brad.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
So just to put you in place and time here, he began his junior high school in the same year that Franklin Roosevelt became president. He listened to his father gripe about the lack of discipline at every level of society and how this was ruining the country. His father continued preaching the gospel of hard work, and the more he talked, the less Hank listened. But he did hear his father and a lot of other people discuss the Great Flood of 34, the result of the heaviest downpour in the recorded history of the region. The local newspapers reported that 36 people died in the 8.27-inch deluge. Jeez. The storm, amidst the suffering brought on by hard times, dramatically showed the people of LA just how bad life can be, no doubt. So here he is, and he's becoming a teenager. His teenage years were marked by rebellion and a growing disdain of authority. He would start to fight with his father, further abuse, fighting, and he had difficulties in school. He refused to conform. He was that kid. He spoke English with a strong German accent, taunted by his playmates. They called him Heini, the German diminutive of Heinrich. And when he was much younger, he was a shy kid, socially withdrawn. And then he came down in his teen years with probably on the bell curve, one of the worst cases of acne that you've ever heard of.
Oh no. That's why his face is so scarred up, huh?
Yep.
Okay.
All right. So, and we're going to read about it. Let me get it. So he's got a skin condition and he graduates from junior high. They're arguing over which high school he would attend. This is a good little segue. Then we'll get to the acne. He wanted to go to LA High on Olympic Boulevard, considered to be the best school around, and the one where the wealthy families from the affluent neighborhood of Hancock Park sent their children. So this is his father wants him to go to the fancy school, or to with the rich kids. He figured that the luster of the rich kids might rub off on his son. This comes out in Ham on Rye as well. I mean, in fact, it was a pretty good cross-section of the city, the population of the school, but there were a lot of rich kids. And his father said to him, "You'll do well to follow the example of the rich kids. They're from the best families, and they know how to buckle down and work." Yeah, because that's how it works. The people who need to work the least work the hardest.
That's right. Yeah.
Yeah, a little upside down. Hank answered that it made better sense to attend Polytechnic High because it was closer to home. He lost the argument and reluctantly registered at LA High School. Worse, his face began to break out with acne. But since a skin condition of this kind was normal for kids his age, no one paid much attention to it. On the first day of school, he rode his bicycle along with a friend of his named Baldy. Many of the other students had their own cars, and most were well-dressed. For an adolescent like Hank, who identified with the poor and who loved to sit back and listen to President Roosevelt's fireside chats, his peers seemed as if they came from a different world. Hank focused much attention on the sons and daughters of the rich, so out of place it seemed to him, in a country ravaged by poverty. That's the thing about these recessions and these depressions that happen. It never touches everybody equally. It doesn't.
Oh, yeah.
And one of the subtexts of wealth is like, you want to have it to shield yourself from, I don't know, 10% inflation, stuff like that.
Right.
Like, that's what it's about. It's and the high contrast of watching families just kind of coast through it compared to people who were like up against it, really, you think must have influenced him for the rest of his life. All right, let's get into the acne. Through the summer before his sophomore year, his skin condition worsened, and as a result, he felt increasingly alienated from other adolescents. Scorn for the student body grew ever more wildly within him when the affliction took a dramatic turn for the worst. It had erupted on his upper torso and his back, as well as his face. The thought of disrobing in the locker room and then having to stand nude in the showers, subjecting himself to possible ridicule, was too much for him. Tremendously embarrassed at this prospect, he opted for ROTC. He was not gung-ho about that, but at least he didn't have to expose himself. The other boys loved their uniforms and wore them proudly. The acne became so bad in that first year of high school that the pustules on his shoulders became raw while he participated in ROTC drills. When drilling with his rifle, he occasionally had to bang his gun against his shoulders quickly and hard. Blood invariably soaked through the uniform. At home, his mother lined that area of his shirt with cloth. Hank often stood before the bathroom mirror, imagining how he must look to others. I felt as if no woman would ever want to be with me. I saw myself as some kind of freak. Remember, they were big. They dominated my face. At the end of the first term of high school, he withdrew from school. He didn't like the idea of being singled out, especially for something that was entirely beyond his control. I'm going to go on because this is so essential. Henry gave him a brown salve, probably sulfur and rosarsenol pastes, and insisted that he keep the paste on his face long after the time indicated in the instructions. "It will make you better," he shouted. "I know what I'm doing." On one particular night, he insisted that Hank leave it on all evening. The burning sensation that came along with it became so intense that he ran to the bathtub, filled it with cold water, and washed the salve away. When his father discovered what he had done, he told his wife, "That son of a bitch doesn't want to be well. Why did I have to have a son like this?" Beyond that, his mother lost her job cleaning houses, and it just goes on. But let's focus a little more on the acne, just to give you a sense of how bad this was. He went to LA County Hospital on the other side of town, and he sat around and waited on the fourth floor where there were charity cases, right? Because the family had no money. Yeah. When his turn came, the doctor looked at him and called in some other doctors for consultation. That's not a good sign.
No.
One of them said it was the worst case of acne vulgaris he had ever seen. Hank was amazed at their insensitivity. They talked about him as if he wasn't even present, in the most frank and insulting terms. One doctor told of a girl who had just cried, saying that she would never get a man because she would be scarred for life. If she could only see this young man, he said, she would see that she had nothing to complain about. Smarting under this kind of abuse, Hank steeled himself against the physical pain subjected upon him. The doctors went to work with ultraviolet treatments. One of the indicated treatments back in the 30s was with a narrow-bladed surgical knife used to promote drainage. In Hank's case, an electric needle was used to drill each pustule individually. One nurse asked him what he did to occupy himself while out of school. He described going home and staying in bed because he was so ashamed of the acne. "That's awful," she said. When he suggested that girls were now out of his life, she told him not to think that way. The nurse was the kindest person he had met in years. She restored his faith. The treatments dragged on for several months, unfortunately not resulting in an improvement. And of course, he's occupied with his looks and the other boys. I mean, it was just like, I don't know if you ever had acne, but I mean, you have to imagine like the worst, I guess, zit that you've ever had, but like covering your entire face, probably 4 times as big, covering your entire upper torso, your shoulders, all of it. Unreal.
No, it's incredibly traumatizing. I mean, yeah, yeah. Oh,
Yeah,
poor,
I got a
poor
little
kid,
more because I
man.
want.
Poor kid.
Yeah, brutal. I mean, in
Yeah.
addition to everything else, and I want to drill this in because this is so essential to his entire psychology and the way he would like write and react the rest of his life, and also why he has. When you look at a picture of him, this is why it
Yeah.
wasn't. He wasn't. It wasn't a knife fight.
Yeah.
Yeah. So let's see here. Got a few more paragraphs. Let's see. While the acne was still at its worst and he was in the first months of treatment, he refused to see any of his friends. His classmates, Jimmy Haddocks and Baldy, came to visit one morning while his parents were away from the house. It was so bad he left school. Crazy.
Right. Right.
He could
Yeah.
hear them outside calling for him, then talking to one another. Hank hid in a closet in the hall, leaving the door slightly ajar. Just as he thought, they had entered the house through the back door, which he had left open. As they searched through the house, Hank swung the closet door open and told them to leave. When they hesitated, he said if they didn't leave, he would kill them.
Hmm.
A breakthrough took place in his treatment at the county hospital. After what seemed like countless sessions of ultraviolet treatment and drilling into the pustules, the doctors applied a salve to his face and then covered it in bandages. His entire head lay beneath the bandages. He liked what he saw when he glanced into the mirror on a cigarette machine in the hospital waiting room. Cigarette machine. We used to be a proper country. We used to be a real country. Your cool milds, just like the doctor smokes for your T-zone. So he needed more drilling, and it went on. And now he's no longer eligible for free medical care because his dad got a job as a guard for the county museum. When Henry found out that Hank's free treatment had been ended, he was furious. Those goddamn doctors are bloodsuckers, he said. They'll take all your money and drive home to their mansions. He sent Hank to a doctor who believed in a nutritional approach for curing acne, a viewpoint that gained in acceptance throughout the 30s. As a result, Hank began a regimen of carrot juice and other items and avoided fried foods. And it goes on, but it starts to... eventually, it does start to get better. This is where he writes his first short story. Let me make sure we're on track here. But before I do, because I want to hear from you a little bit, Brad, where are you at with him right now? Where are you at with?
I just feel bad for him. I mean, he's got these things that have this is all this stuff, the abuse, the acne. This is all just purely circumstantial. None of this is like laying in the bed you made kind of stuff, right? This just sucks. Yeah. And and man, the thing about the father's discipline is always so interesting to me. There's always, a parenting technique. You can't have no discipline, but you see this a lot where it crosses some line and the kid's ultimate reaction is to just say screw it to all of the rules. Right? It turns into just like, well, I don't care about, there is no authority. None of, it gets into this arbitrary, unfair, cruel territory, and person internalizes that, and that to them, it turns into, I'm all for rebellion when it makes sense, but when you rebel against everything, sometimes there's nothing left.
You're going to have some problems in life, without a doubt. It's not raising a child, it's enduring a child until you can get rid of them.
Right.
That's not parenting.
Right. Exactly.
And then there's that weird line in abuse, including mental abuse, where there's a quality of like unresolved sadomasochistic impulses in the parent that kind of get visited on the child.
Right.
And I think we're definitely in that territory.
Yeah.
It's not often rendered very effectively in like film, but you can get the sense of it from his writing for sure. Yeah. It's often shown in like a cartoonish way. And it's not a cartoon because not only are you're like psychically enmeshed with the parent. The parent's supposed to be your conduit to the world at 11. And not only is that conduit all screwed because they're all screwed up, but then you're getting this weird feedback loop. Yeah. It doesn't even need to get physical for it to be totally twisted.
Oh, no, not at all. I mean, yeah.
But this was heavily physical.
Well, and the physical is almost always matched with a lot of mental too, right? You know what I mean?
Oh, sure.
And psychological abuse. Yeah. Yeah.
Well, let's get to this first story. I have a few quotes from him about his childhood. And these would come out later in the 70s and the 80s when he was famous and people were interviewing him. I had the typical horrendous childhood, and I know what it feels like to be neglected and abused and not liked, and to grow up with all kinds of hangups and hatreds and anxieties. It's nothing unusual. Another quote: I had a terrible childhood. It was pretty bad all the way around. I couldn't stand authority, and I still can't. I couldn't stand authority in any way, shape, or form, and it was always there. Another one: I came from a family where my father was a real authoritarian, and I never really recovered from that. So I decided to be the opposite. And that's speaking to what you just mentioned, Brad. And he says here, I grew up with the two most frightening women I have ever met in my life, and I've met a lot of women. The cruelty and strangeness that went on in that house were unbelievable. And in Born Into This, he goes back to the house.
Oh God.
And walks you through it, and he's very impassioned about it. He's not happy. But what's a young man gonna do? How's he gonna escape? Well, let's go. In the fall of 1935, when his acne was at its worst, Hank wrote his first short story, basing his main character on Baron Manfred von Richthofen. You know who that was, Brad?
No idea.
The Red Baron.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, the World War I flying ace.
Yeah,
the most kills of any ace in
I used to enjoy his pizza.
Yeah.
15 minutes in the oven, 400 degrees.
Delicious. Yeah. Going on. His hand was shot off, and he kept fighting guys out of the sky. This is all psychologically impossible, I understand. But remember, my face was breaking out in boils while everybody else was making love to their fellow students and all that. That tortured him, that he wasn't able to have a car, pick up a girl, go to prom, get laid. He was acutely aware of that, as anybody would be at that age in LA in the 30s. Yeah. So he said, I was the ugly boy of the neighborhood, so I wrote this long story. It was a little yellow notebook, cost me 6 cents. I wrote with a pencil how this guy with the iron hand shot down this guy and that guy. To have created this half real, half imaginary man excited him. From that moment on, he knew that he had an escape valve, a way to fight the fear that he sensed all around him and the lack of understanding. Another thing he had learned was the value of being alone. Having endured solitude enough in his childhood, he found new value in it as an adolescent, being forced to go into himself, to find things to do, and to think over within the confines of his house during the months of convalescence. He learned to face himself more keenly than before, to seek his own counsel more easily. And he missed one semester of school, but then made his way back to school. And I've got a little bit about alcohol. We're coming up. We'll get to some poetry here at some point. There's a lot of good stuff. I'm very excited to hear Jason read. His poems are wonderful. And they're voluminous. So if there's a poem you don't like, just read the next one because you'll get more. All right. Before I go on, Jason, where are you at with Bukowski right now in terms of the bio?
So this is all really interesting in terms of like that formativeness that you were talking about in the anti-authoritarianism. I was rereading Post Office this morning to get us ready.
His first novel.
And what's interesting is that, and I think this is where he gets picked up by 70s counterculture, is that the main antagonists are all sadistic bosses in that novel. They're all people who he identifies as being directly confrontational with him, and then he internalizes that and mouths back off to them and has this back and forth. And it's not just one, it's multiple. It moves from one antagonist to another antagonist as he remains within the Postal Service. And that's so interesting to what you were saying, Kevin, about his dad. And, you know, I know we don't like to psychoanalyze here on the show, but it's weird not to see that as something that carries on from his childhood into, you know, how he processes his adulthood, even if those are heavy fictionalized events in the novel.
Right. And this is a fellow who doesn't have the character of a boss or a manager. He's always going to be, until he finds himself in his writing, a factotum. He's just going to do odd jobs. And he's like a man, a very, very sensitive man, trapped inside like an Escher painting. And on every level, there's a new boss or manager. And he has, Oh, you're muted, Jason.
We lost your audio there for a second.
Lost your audio.
Okay.
No worries.
That's the thing that really was impressed on me going back in reading stuff for today is how sensitive Bukowski is. It goes against sort of the stereotype of this womanizing, misogynistic, you know, hard, scrabbled guy. In the writing, particularly in the poetry, there is just bare, naked, nerve-ending sensitivity, and it goes back to these formative experiences too of when he was a kid.
Yeah,
without a doubt.
Yeah, it's interesting, Kevin. You talked at the beginning, like maybe there is such a thing as toxic masculinity. I mean, I think one of the manifestations of this kind of thing is like you take a sensitive person like Bukowski, insightful with perspective, and you throw him into a world that just crushes that, right? Just grinds that down. And of course, it's going to be booze and he's trying to coat himself with things to survive, right? Emotionally and psychologically.
Sure.
Yeah. I mean, maybe that's a speculation. But
no, we say toxic masculinity. It's toxic humanity. Humanity has toxicity in it.
He grew up in a toxic environment. I mean, like from that experience, if the story would have ended and then at 16 he committed suicide, like would it have been that big of a surprise? It would have been tragic, but it wouldn't have been a surprise.
We never would. That's happening right now to some poor person.
Exactly. Right.
And we'll never hear about it.
Right.
It'll be a statistic or So I gotta cover his drinking a little bit. Because, of course, he's one of the all-time famous writer drinkers of the 20th century. You've got Hemingway, Hunter, Bukowski, probably. Faulkner was known for drinking, but I mean, he's one of these cliches. It's a cliche. You think about booze when you think about Bukowski. In 1937, during the last semester of the school year, Hank began drinking because he looked older than his age. And he began drinking. This wasn't like, you'll hear, okay? Because he looked older, he occasionally went into bars in downtown LA. Nice. This must have been when the drinking age was 18. And he found whiskey to his liking. He met 3 guys who were 3 or 4 years older than himself. One was a tall, well-built fellow with light blonde hair that fell over his forehead and was perpetually uncombed. He made his living by robbing service stations. Based. Just random. Another don't rob thing. Oh yeah. No. Another was a pleasant young man called Stinky. I should have saved the bass for that one. Double bass. Hank always stuck. If your nickname's Stinky, get a clue.
Yeah.
I gotta tell you a story. So my great uncle who helped raise me after my father passed away. Happy Father's Day, by the way. He was in Korea and he had a skunk tattoo on like his right bicep. And right underneath, there's a black skunk. The red nose had faded, but right underneath it said Stinky.
Yeah. Was that like
for like an army tattoo, right? So
Yeah.
hey,
Yeah.
maybe I don't know. Maybe this. I don't think this was my great uncle, but pretty funny. Anyway, runs in the family.
Yeah.
All right. So Hank always stuck up for him and protested against the nickname. They hung out. Yeah. So there you go. He's rooting for the underdog. He's always looking out. Okay. They hung out with a married man who held down a steady job and rented a large apartment. As the oldest of the group and the one with a steady job, he supplied whiskey and kept his house open to his friends. Hank was able to articulate many of the thoughts that these three other young men had, and they admired him for it. Drinking buddies.
Mhm.
All of society came under his scrutiny as he attacked it with relentless energy, never raising his voice to be like a soapbox orator. With an absolutely cool demeanor, he said things like, I don't care about anything or anybody. Nothing matters. On numerous occasions, the four of them held drinking contests. Hank usually won. The money he earned, so they're like real contests.
Like a professional drinker.
Tremendous.
Yeah.
The money he earned supplied him with liquor of his own. Stinky became so smashed after one of the drinking bouts that he half crawled into the bathroom. When Hank went to check on him, he found his friend sacked out in the bathtub. In order to meet his drinking buddies, Hank always waited until his parents turned out the lights and went to bed, which was at 8 o'clock every night, like clockwork. Once he knew they were asleep, he opened the back window, climbed out, negotiated his way over a hedge, and then caught the streetcar. Getting back home was a little more difficult. He never left sober from these get-togethers with his friends. Tottering down the street to the streetcar stop, he would somehow keep on his feet, climb on board when the car came, and collapse onto a seat. Neither of his parents seemed to know how he spent his evenings because he usually climbed back into the house through the same window. There was little chance of his activities being discovered. The closer Hank came to the date of his graduation, the more boldly he acted. He stopped trying to mask his morning hangovers. Look at him. How will he ever get a job? Hank's father said one morning. And what will the neighbors think? What will become of you? I want no more of this drinking. Do you understand me? If you don't stop drinking now, you'll keep doing it all of your life, and then we'll see what will become of you. Yeah. A few days later, he came up
or
to
become
the door
like you, Dad. You want me to become like you, Dad?
Yeah, right. For real. Yeah.
Learn it from you, Dad.
Right. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
A few days later, he came up to the house, the door of his parents' house, and knocked rather than going in through the back window as he usually did. His mother opened a little window in the door and yelled, "Henry, oh Henry, he's drunk again." Hank heard his father's booming, awful voice. He's drunk again. This is important. Henry's footsteps resounded through the house as he ran from the bedroom up to the front door. He looked out of the small window and told Hank that he would not open the door. You are a disgrace to your mother and your country. Hank complained that it was cold and warned his father he would break the door down unless he opened it immediately. No, my son, you did not deserve my house. True to his word, Hank stepped back several paces and then ran at breakneck speed toward the door. His shoulders lowered, his weight leaning forward. He failed to completely break the door down, although a sharp cracking sound assured him that he had damaged the lock. His father gave in at that point. Hank walked inside. His mother looked at him coldly. His father's face, etched in hatred, made him sick. He wanted to tell him so. Instead, his stomach contracted and he vomited on the rug. You know what we do when a dog shits on the rug? His father asked. No, Hank answered. Henry rushed forward and grabbed Hank's neck from behind. Skipped a page here. You are a dog, he screamed, and tried pushing Hank down in the pool of vomit. Hank struggled to get free, not an easy matter given Henry's height. He said in a firm, commanding voice, "Stop. I am asking you one last time, stop." This provoked more pressure from his father, who managed to press Hank down so that his nose almost touched the soiled rug. Then, as if through some miraculous power, Hank swung his arm up and punched his father with a solid uppercut to the chin. The big man fell backward into the sofa. His mother, who had already been screaming hysterically, dug her fingernails into her son's face, screaming, "You hit your father! You hit your father! Mein Gott! How could you do such a thing?" Hank stood there, feeling almost serene. I was out of the picture, really, he recalls. I mean, the old man had fallen, and in my mind, it was all over, so I just stood there while he continued to dig into me. Blood spattered onto the floor, mixing with the vomit. and creating little pools of blood here and there. After several minutes passed, Hank, who was himself a mess of blood, asked his mother if she had finished. Yes, she replied. The drinking, however, had just begun.
Oh, jeez.
Happy Father's Day, gentlemen.
Yeah. Dang. Yeah.
So there you go. Jason, do you have a bit from Ham on Rye about him at the prom?
No, I don't have the section on the prom.
No worries. I'll blast through some of this stuff. I want to get to the point where his father kicks him out, essentially, which I think we could probably see coming.
Yeah, I thought that was going to be the end of that story. And he never went back again. Yeah.
No spoilers on Art of Darkness. All right, so here are a few Bukowski quotes on drinking. Well, before I read these, there's a great bit in that documentary where he talks about liquor being a symphony. You use it to lift yourself up. He loved drinking. He was certainly an alcoholic, but he didn't seem to be too bothered by it. Like, he made it work. Not all alcoholics can make it work for as long as Hank did. And he had a serious conscious relationship with alcohol. Here's what he said. That's the problem with drinking, I thought, as I poured myself a drink. This is from Women, which is a novel he wrote in the late 70s after women started throwing themselves at him because he was famous. So I'll read it again. That's the problem with drinking, I thought, as I poured myself a drink. If something bad happens, you drink in an attempt to forget. If something good happens, you drink in order to celebrate. And if nothing happens, you drink to make something happen. Preach.
Yeah.
Another quote. Drinking is an emotional thing. It joggles you out of the standardism of everyday life, out of everything being the same. Another one. I don't know if I'm an alcoholic. I don't drink when I'm in New York. I drink 4 or 5 times a year. I go through long periods where I don't drink at all. But when I'm drunk, I'm drunk. That's from a 1988 interview. You get the impression that like maybe he cooled down later in life based on that, but because when he was young, he was definitely like day drinking.
Yeah.
And this is a great quote from Factotum. This is put it on a shirt. Drinking is only a problem when you stop.
Okay.
Yep.
Yeah.
So good. So I do have a bit from this biography about prom, just to give you what happened there. There's a beautiful section in Ham on Rye, but I think this is worth reading. As in all high schools, the upcoming senior prom was a primary topic among graduating seniors, except for Hank, who had convinced himself that no girl would want to be seen with him. The prom was one rite of passage he would have to pass up, but he did plan on attending the graduation ceremonies. The thought of having to put on a robe, however, and to put up with the principal's dreary speech and then stand in line to await the awarding of his diploma filled him with loathing. The graduating seniors made big plans for prom night. Many of the boys would be picking up their dates for the festivities in cars. All Hank had was a bicycle. He listened to the excited talk with an increasing sense of alienation. His feeling of being on the outside was growing ever more acute, especially since he now bore permanent scars on his face. The lack of self-esteem that had emerged when the acne first appeared still governed many of his actions. An inner revolt had taken hold of him. Ideas that would later surface in his writing about how the entire structure of society was populated by smooth-talking phonies. His father did not view Hank's graduation with pride. Rather than delivering a speech to him in which he saw a future filled with opportunity, he portrayed a bleak landscape of poverty and unfulfilled ambition. He kept mentioning normal kids, asking his son why he couldn't be more like them. Whenever he could, he drew verbal tableaus of failure, summoning up images of furnished rooms on Skid Row. You want to end bum? That's what'll happen if you don't get some direction in life. Boy and girl paired off for prom night at the high school. A ritual played out, of course, all across the country. Talk of the prom grew more intense as the day approached. Girls huddled together in the hallways or on the school grounds discussing their plans, ogling certain young men. The guys huddled together to brag about their intended sexual conquests. The night of the prom, Hank left Longwood Avenue and walked over to the girls' gym where the prom was being held. Arriving at the entrance, he heard live music and animated conversation, laughter, applause, joyful shouts, all intermingled. He stood so near to the wondrous scene within, and yet he stood across an unbridgeable gulf. No matter how he intellectually defined himself as being different, the nonconformist, he yearned to be there with the other young people. He stayed hidden away and looked inside through a wire mesh window. Every one of the girls had been transformed into an adult. They were so mature looking in their long, flowing, formal gowns. Their gestures seemed grown up. The boys in tuxedos were equally impressive. Couples danced with ease and grace or stood in small groups conversing. What further astonished the lonely onlooker was the sight of some of the other class outsiders. There they were, secure, well-dressed, joining in with the more well-known campus personalities. Hank peered in at the scene with his nose pressed to the wire screen. The obligatory punch bowl sat at the center of a decorated table. Young men gallantly led their dates onto the dance floor. Nearby, a good-looking girl with a glass of punch in hand, watching the orchestra and whispering something into the ear of her date. He remained in the darkness, observing, celebrating, and cursing his solitude. He began to feel like an animal, some kind of beast, as he compared himself to his self-assured classmates. In later years, when he often signed his letter Beast Buck, perhaps he thought back on the night of the prom he didn't attend. He thought of the girls, wondering how it would feel to touch one, holding her in his arms, embracing her, kissing her. Yet the mere thought of talking to some of the more stately, beautiful girls filled him with terror. Surely they would laugh or run away in horror if he made advances of any kind. And then he said, watching them dance, later he would say, I really did begin to hate them, all of them, as they danced so flawlessly. They had easy, untroubled lives. They had rich parents, most of them did. Yeah. So pretty heavy. In Ham on Rye, he describes himself like with his head wrapped in gauze, I think, in the novel. So maybe it wasn't, but he was scarred already at that point from the acne.
Yeah, that's not taking too much poetic license, right? I mean, he was in bandages and scarred up at some point. So yeah.
So we're gonna get him out of his house and into college and on the road, and then begin getting him into some of the poetry. But I think
he went to college.
He briefly attended LA City College, but before we go there, sort of. Just to let me see here. This is what, so he's going through all of this. We've just spent an hour, 80 minutes ish, 75 minutes describing his tortured childhood and his torturous time in high school. And this is what some of his classmates said. Jane Mary Ball, Eklund, who graduated along with Hank and went on to write 2 novels and 2 textbooks, says she doesn't remember him at all. She continues, we graduated in an aura of innocence. A lot of our class went into the military, of course, because what's coming, Brad?
World War II.
There you go.
Yeah.
She goes on, the innocence was soon shattered by the war. She and several other students, including Ray Bradbury and Elma Bacher, author of An Island Called California, were part of an informal writers group. Hank didn't even know the group existed, but he says that if he had, he would have avoided it. He had a couple of friends, but I just think it's funny. One of his classmates, like, no, I had no idea he existed, which is, of course, exactly what it would be like.
Yeah. I mean, you think everybody's paying attention to you, and the fact of the matter is, the worst case is nobody's paying any attention to you.
Right, and one of the things that I think is so interesting, as he describes it too in Ham on Rye, is he's not an ostrich in terms of his place in society. He's not categorized. He's athletic, or he tries to be athletic. He isn't a nerd as people would expect, right? he doesn't fit into that type of category. He's just a guy.
Right.
He's a big galoot.
Yeah.
And his family doesn't have any money. He's in LA and he rides a bike to school. Right. And you're just at the bottom of the pecking order. There's really,
right.
And there's, and outside of some incredible prowess on the football field or some other standout academic, he's just one of these kind of burnout kids that you probably remember, gentlemen, because nothing changes.
Yeah.
Right.
And he'd endured too much to be like a charismatic kind of fun-loving guy at this point too, right? I mean,
right. He's not cracking wise in class. And how do you relate to other kids, much less young girls becoming women, but girls, when you've suffered beatings? Like, you're just not, your brain is quite, I think, literally going to be developing in a different way, and you're going to just be overflowing with rage and bitterness. And it's and I'm not making, this isn't apologetics for his later misbehavior, because he was a tough dude. I mean, and he did himself no favors going forward. However, you look at this and you go, okay, well, I mean, frankly, you got school shooter vibes over this.
Yeah,
this is like, it could have been a heck of a lot worse.
Yeah, you could see him, somebody crosses him in just the right way and he just murders the guy. Again, like the suicide thing. That wouldn't be a surprise. Or he's drunk.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And that's so interesting, Brad, that you should say that, because one of the refrains that comes up all the time in the fiction is he says, "I'm going to kill you."
Oh, really? Okay. Yeah, dark.
He has this refrain throughout a lot of the novels of when he comes to heads with someone, that's his go-to response is, I'm going to kill you.
Wow. Yeah, it's interesting. There's a lot of there's a lot of appeal in all kinds of different transgression, drugs and this and that. And then when somebody crosses into murderous territory, I think everybody kind of takes one step back and is like, okay.
Right.
Yeah. Uh-oh.
Yeah, he would love to say, "I'll kill you, motherfucker."
Yeah.
Motherfucker, I'll kill you.
Right.
Yeah, he just said he was he could swear.
Yeah. I'm sure.
As well as anybody.
And yet he's bookish, which I think throws out all those preconceived ideas. Reading all of this, like, fairly heavy literature. He's reading D.H. Lawrence. He's reading Huxley.
You're kind of cutting in and out there, Jason.
Hemingway.
Yep. No worries. But he's reading heavily. We'll keep an eye on it. If it gets to be more of a problem, we'll try to reconnect you. But and he loves, at one point he loved the library. I mean, we sort of blasted past that, but I mean, I don't know, Brad, do you ever remember as a child, like, discovering the library and just going, how can this place be real?
Yeah. I mean, I liked going to the library for sure. And definitely, like, disappear into books. It's very good escapist territory to get into. Yeah. So I can see that happening.
Well, so moving forward in the bio a little bit, he graduates from LA High. He would attend LA City College for a couple of years, taking courses in art, journalism, and literature. He had a job at Sears Roebuck for like a week or two that didn't last. And it was sort of one of his first experiences of going, this is not going to work. I'm not going to be able to do this. He just knew he was in trouble. And he would write in Ham on Rye about some of his colleagues. So let's read this. This isn't from Ham on Rye. I'll get to it. Hank became aware that Sears demanded employees who were content to spend their entire lives on the job. This would be one of my first lessons. They expected people to give their entire lives and all their loyalty to some shit job. I would see it again and again in LA, New Orleans, Philadelphia, wherever I traveled. How he found this truth was simple. he met his fellow employees, and he describes them in Ham on Rye. 4 men and 3 women. They were all old. They seemed to have salivary problems. Little clumps of spittle had formed at the corners of their mouths. The spittle had dried and turned white and then been coated by new, wet spittle. Some of them were too thin, others too fat. Some were nearsighted, others trembled. One old fellow in a brightly colored shirt had a hump on his back. They all smiled and coughed, puffing at cigarettes. And his job consisted of making deliveries from the stockroom to the various sales sections of the store. Here I was, the tough guy, Hank Bukowski. I kept wondering what the guys from school would say if they saw me working with this crew of misfits. So he didn't last long, and he did not like that job. And so he enrolled into college partly to appease his father. Because if he's going to college, at least he's doing something.
Right.
But
yeah.
All right. So his father kicks him out. One afternoon. And why do you think his father kicks him out, Brad?
I mean, boozing? It's not like he stopped boozing.
No, the other vice.
Sex?
No. He wouldn't lose his virginity until he was 23.
Oh, I was going to think. Yeah.
It's because of his writing.
Oh, God. Right.
One afternoon, Hank was on his way home from City College when his mother suddenly appeared before him. "Henry, you can't go home. Your father is furious. He will kill you." Hank was taken completely by surprise. He said, "How is he going to hurt me? I can whip his ass." Catherine Bukowski explained that the old man had found Hank's short stories. He read them. Henry, all of them. She described in detail how he had come across them in a drawer and sat down to read them. "He told me he was going to kill you."
I just imagine him reading every one. Just, "I will kill him. I will kill him.
I'm gonna kill him."
Baron is flying
He's
around.
gonna keep killing him. Yep. And right. So his father had thrown out all of the stories along with his clothing and typewriter onto the lawn.
God.
When Hank heard that, he became furious and could hardly wait for a confrontation. His mother tried to stop him, holding onto the back of his shirt as he kept on going. When they came to the house on Longwood Avenue, a few blocks away, Hank saw his writing scattered everywhere, across the same lawn that had caused him so much hell as a child. He stood there amidst the dirty laundry, the loose papers, the bric-a-brac of his life, and yelled for his father to come out of the house so that he could beat him up. He waited. When his father did not come forward, he began picking up his manuscripts and then his typewriter. He walked to the W streetcar, paid, took a transfer, and headed downtown to Temple Street, where he found inexpensive lodgings in a district filled with Filipino immigrants. The rent came to $1.50 per week for a cramped room on the second floor. Little did he know that his newfound quarters foreshadowed hundreds of more rooms, roughly the same size and equally shabby. Far from feeling down in the mouth, however, he took to his new environment, especially when he found a bar almost directly downstairs, a place mostly frequented by Filipinos, whose slick gangster-like appearance appealed to him. Yeah. And this is another side of America that he covers that isn't like not a lot of writers cover. Is this just like down and out day laborer living in a rented room, a shared bathroom down the hall? Maybe you have a sink in your room. Maybe you have a hot plate. Those used to be way more common. That was a thing. Now those are being replaced by those like neoliberal Facebook looking apartments that are just boxes and everything's a luxury building now.
Inefficiency. Now we call it an efficiency. And
but these are like boarding rooms for laborers, and they had them everywhere back when there was work to do.
Right.
Right. Yeah. Now that we're in a post-work era. All right. So so we're getting to 1941 here, and he stayed at City College because he didn't know what else to do. And now we're coming up to the war. Whew. So, all right.
So he was born in 1920, correct?
I believe so, yes.
Yeah.
Let me make sure it's right. Yep, 1920. Okay. So we're into the 40s. So he's 20-ish. And I'm just gonna press on here as we get into the war. So at some juncture here, he makes his way east to New York City to begin a career as a financially pinched blue-collar worker with the hopes of becoming a writer. He took a bus to New Orleans first, and there's a bit of a pit stop where he got chatting with some young woman on the bus from Texas, from Fort Worth, to the point where she was like crying and begging for him to get off the bus with her, but he didn't do it. He went to New Orleans, then he went back and tried to find her, got in, like talked with a journalist in Dallas who published a paper saying like a misconnection, but zhuzhing it up, saying a young writer from LA on a plane wanted to meet Mrs. So-and-so. And then he finally meets her and shows up at the house, and they're like these ultra Christians, and he gets weirded out. So he just goes back to New Orleans. Like this is the thing about covering Bukowski's life, is we're already 90 minutes into this episode, is like stuff like that happens to him a lot. Like this the dude is like, once you hit the road, in the 40s, it's just story after story after story. And it's no surprise that he would like end up being pretty widely considered to be a good, if not great, writer of stories. Because there's all kinds of crazy shit happens to you when you have one suitcase with maybe you have a typewriter in it and you hit the road. He's got those stories.
Yeah. And Titterant. Yeah.
Yep. So, and he would go back and forth to LA. He did a stint in San Francisco, and then he finally went back out east. And on July 22nd, he drew one of the like longest tail draft cards possible. Like there was no way he was going to be drafted. He just got lucky. He drew a, like, you know, the Germans would have to be like fighting the Americans to the last man. You know, he got lucky with the draft card. So he's popping around the country, but this is a time, one, he's a German American,
right?
Not bringing that up. It's not a popular thing. Two, it's a time where if a young man is like on a bus or in a grocery store, not serving,
he
like
gets shamed. Yeah.
Oh yeah. And his father would shame him. There was one point where he came back to LA and his parents had put like a gold star on the house, which was meant to indicate that their father had been, or that their son had been killed in combat. And there's a little anecdote where his father's like, well, now what are we going to tell the neighbors? Right. Oh my God. Which is so, I mean, just like, wow, you'd be better dead in the war, you know?
Right. Wow.
Right. So it's 1944. He's arrested by FBI agents in Philadelphia because he is suspected of draft evasion. And I'm going to read this. Yeah. I'm going to read this story. Okay. Let's see. He stayed in Philadelphia twice. I can't be real positive on the dates, he says. You know, I was drunk on my ass all the time and getting into fights. I hardly even knew the war was going on. People would talk about some battle in Europe or the Pacific, and I didn't know what the fuck they were talking about. Despite his high draft number, Hank was obligated to report to the draft board, but he had fallen into the habit of not responding to the notices he received from them and that asking him that he send his current address. He was itinerant. He's moving around. Rather than doing that, he merely left his forwarding address at the post office, thinking that would be sufficient. He had received a notice from the Selective Service in St. Louis to report there for his draft examination, but wrote back to say he had moved on and wanted to appear at the board in Philadelphia. He never received a response. One night, late in 1942, while writing in a Philadelphia rooming house, there was a knock on his door. He thought it either had to be the landlord or one of the people living on his floor. He buttoned his shirt, walked to the door, and opened it. Two well-dressed men stood before him. He had been drinking on and off most of the afternoon and evening, and in his semi-feverish condition, he thought that these men had come to offer him a Pulitzer Prize. Considering that he had Considering that he had not published anything yet, that would have been quite some achievement. One of them asked if he was Henry C. Bukowski. Yeah, he said. Come with us, the man responded, and bring your coat along. He added that he and his partner were FBI agents. Perplexed, Hank went back into his room for his coat, turned off the radio, and went with them downstairs. They led him to a waiting car where two other men sat. He got in the car with them and they drove off. One of the men commented that Hank was acting pretty cool about being taken from his room by FBI agents. Most people would be asking what they had done wrong and a lot of other questions. The man continued. Hank remained listless. He was entertaining thoughts of suicide during this period of his life, working as little as possible, and wondering, feeling already defeated, if he would have made it writing stories had circumstances been different. Nothing these men said or did could affect him much. That's so funny. You're just so despairing. The FBI picks you up. You're like,
this. All right, whatever.
I don't care. Yeah. The agents became so aggravated by his coolness that they began hassling him in minor ways. Sit up, a gruff-voiced man said. Another mentioned that they hadn't hit him yet, and perhaps they should. We haven't struck you, have we? Not yet, Hank answered. He was ordered to keep his hands on his knees. Just before they turned into the facility where he would be held for one night, he reached up to scratch his nose. Okay, watch that hand.
Pull a weapon out of his nose or something?
All right. He did have quite a schnoz. He really did. Yeah.
He does. Yeah, it's true.
Yeah. After one night in a holding tank, he was taken to Mymensingh prison, a large detention center built in a neo-Egyptian style in 1836 and closed in 1963. Described as a huge urban jail by a former guard, the facility once held Edgar Allan Poe as a prisoner in the debtor's wing. Future subject.
Yeah.
The other section where Hank would be detained looked like a medieval castle with turrets and brick walls. It consisted of a pair of 3-story cell blocks housing over 1,200 inmates. It had originally been a facility for hardened criminals, but now housed a population of inmates interned for a variety of petty offenses. You just live it in Philly. It's just a place for if you're living in Philly and you jaywalk. As he entered the prison, a huge door swung open. It seemed over 30 feet wide and easily as high. Hank imagined himself entering a castle on the Rhine. Instead of feeling downcast, he felt honored and in awe. He landed in a cell with a swindler we'll call John Jones, who Hank claims held the distinction of being public enemy number one, although the term has always been loosely applied. Jones was heavy-set and balding, not a particularly menacing-looking fellow, but, as Hank found out, neither did he have a good disposition. When Hank told him he had been arrested for draft dodging, Jones became exceedingly self-righteous, saying that he and the other inmates didn't like draft dodgers or indecent exposure cases, to which Hank snapped back, "Oh, I see, it's honor among thieves, right? You just keep the country strong so you can rob it." "We still don't like draft dodgers," Jones said. And it goes on, and it's about his time when he's in the clink. But I think he spent like a couple of weeks there. Jeez. And this is a time when the U.S. was at war with Germany, right? Mm-hmm. And German Americans were suspected of disloyalty. Mm-hmm. He was born in Germany.
Yeah.
He was held for 17 days in that prison.
And let's face it, not that he was disloyal. He wasn't particularly loyal either.
Sure. I don't think that Hank has much of a reason to love his country at this point.
Fair enough.
Yeah. And that's okay. Sometimes that's all right. Yeah, he hasn't had the easiest time.
No, he doesn't know anybody anything at this point.
Yeah, fair enough. Well, so at some point he has to go to the induction center, and he figured he'd end up having to serve in the army. When it came time for his physical, he found his way to a crowded building in downtown Philly. The men there with him were mostly young and desperate looking. He was thin, disheveled, weakened by heavy bouts of drinking. Others were frightened and bewildered. He went through his physical and passed. Then they sent him to see the psychiatrist, a middle-aged man with a kindly face. The authorities had confiscated several of his manuscripts when they had arrested him and handed them over to the psychiatrist, who probably passed Hank off as unstable when he read lines like, "My mother's heart is dead." The doctor briefly shuffled through some papers, then looked up at Hank and asked, "Do you believe in the war?" "No," Hank answered. The psychiatrist then put this question to him: "Are you willing to go fight the war?" He said he would if he was called on. And then the psychiatrist said, "I can see that you are a very intelligent man." Now, this is Bukowski's account, of course.
Mm-hmm.
"We're having a party over at my place next Wednesday. There will be doctors, lawyers, scientists, artists, and writers. Will you come to my party?" Hank said no. Rather than being offended, he was told, "All right, you don't have to go." "Where?" "To the war." As Hank got up to leave, the doctor said, You didn't think we would understand, did you?" So that's sort of how he got out of the war. And then they would come back a few years later. I think the FBI, and they arrested him again, or it was like 4 days later, and they were looking for his Uncle John, who was dead. And and when he told them that his Uncle John was dead, the agent said, "Jesus, no wonder we can't find him."
Yeah.
So he was made 4F, which is unfit for military service.
Right.
That
It's just
reminds
that
me,
they just look at it and they're like, turns out you're Charles Bukowski. We don't think we should send you. Be
you
better
got some poems to write.
Right.
This reminds me of one of my favorite bits from Annie Hall. You familiar with this one? Where he's on the Dick Cavett show, and he says he's got a special classification. Here's the quote: "They did not take me in the army. I was, interestingly enough, I was 4P, Dick Cavett, 4P."
Yeah.
And then he says, "Yes, in the event of war, I'm a hostage." I love that joke. That's a great one. But yeah, Bukowski was like that. He had a few things to say too about being a kraut in America. Here's what he said: "I'm German. I think there's something German in me. I do respect authority." So that's very interesting. This is much later.
Mm-hmm.
"I was brought up in America, but I wasn't an American. I was a German. I couldn't get along with the American kids. I just didn't fit in." So he's got that quality of almost being like a first generation. I mean, certainly he was on his mother's side, and his father doesn't sound like his father was very assimilated into America either,
Right.
His army. And one more quote: "I always felt like a foreigner in America, but I guess that's good. You can't write too much about being American because everybody else has done that, but you can write a lot about being a foreigner." Very interesting. I've got a bit about the first time he had sex. You guys want to hear it?
Yeah.
Let's go.
Yeah.
All right, we're in this to win this. I think Jason, during the prep, you said you're prepared to go the distance.
Okay. All right.
Yeah, this guy gets it. This is going to be good. All right. He's 23 when he loses his virginity. Okay. In Philadelphia, at the age of 23, he had sex for the first time. While sitting at a bar near where he lived, an extremely fat woman of indeterminate age walked in. He sat beside her and ordered several rounds of drinks. Because he was drunk, he could speak openly, saying that he could offer her something she would never forget. She seemed amused, and this encouraged him to go on in that vein, which he did, telling her all the delightful things he was going to do once they were alone. The woman laughed and suggested they go up to his place. We stayed until closing time. Then we walked to my place. She must have weighed 300 pounds. I wrote a story about her. In his recounting of the story published in the underground newspaper Open City during the 60s and included in the book Notes of a Dirty Old Man, he wrote, "Then she really started to bounce and whirl. I hung on and tried to find the rhythm. She rotated pretty good, but it was rotate and then up and down and then back to rotate. I got the rhythm of the rotate, but on the top, up and down, I got thrown out of the saddle several times. I mean, the deck would be coming up as I hit it, which is all right under ordinary conditions. But with her, as I hit the deck coming on, it simply caromed me completely out of the saddle and oftentimes almost out of the bed onto the floor." It doesn't sound like a good time.
No, not particularly. No.
Yeah, that's not how I would describe satisfying. Yeah. In the morning, he and the woman woke up to find that the bed had totally collapsed during their escapades. Hank didn't know what would happen when the landlady saw it. He offered the fat lady some money, but she told him that she could not accept it. He was the first man in years to make her feel good. Hey,
Aw.
you know what? All right. Good for
Yeah.
you, old gal. Good job.
Yeah.
Yeah. When he came home from his job the following evening, he passed the landlady and the cleaning woman who made some comments about the bed. Hank walked into his room and saw that they had replaced his old wooden bed with a steel-framed one. The landlady said, "Let's see what you can do with this one."
Wow.
It's not all bad. He's having some fun. He's getting laid.
Yeah. All right.
So you know the biggest. This is a point that I wanted to make, and I'm glad that we got to it. The biggest complaint during the 70s and 80s about Bukowski was that his writing was borderline pornographic. And I think that that's a mischaracterization of what he's doing, even when he's writing about sex. I think he is too self-aware and has too much of a sense of humor about himself to enter into that. Mm-hmm. He in that portion that he talks about in what you just read, Kevin, where he says that she felt good about herself. That's the opposite sort of strictly pornographic writing. That's not that wouldn't be, you know, he's not writing in order to titillate. He's not. Right. He loves talking about sex, and there could be lots of reasons why that's true, and we talked about some of them already tonight. Mm-hmm. But that's not the equation. I think it's misrepresentation to say that he's writing pornographically.
His style can be at times a little cartoonish.
Yeah, well, that part sounds cartoonish for sure. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. He's very funny. He's a very funny writer. And he was a very funny man. I mean, you could call him a raconteur. I mean, he'd be somebody you'd want to sit at a bar and kind of like be a fly on the wall in a bar where he was a guy would be fascinating. And they eventually they made Barfly into a movie that he didn't particularly think was a good representation, but he had that kind of a life where it's like, hell, let's make a movie about this guy at bars. Mm-hmm. You know, you have to be able to tell jokes and tell good stories and have a good sense of humor about yourself. I mean, if you live in a life like this and your first lay is a 300-pound woman, you know, you tell the story, breaking the bed, that's funny. I mean, you know, everybody else, gets laid when they're 16, 17 in high school, at the prom, in the back of the seat, the car, whatever else is going on. For him, it was at a boarding house.
Right. Drunk as a skunk, big woman. He couldn't stay. Yeah, it is funny. Yeah. And it doesn't, it also, I think some people could take umbrage in that the writing isn't very kind to this woman, but it's not, he's not overly demeaning her, right? Like he's not going into like, trying to depict her as repulsive or in any way. He's just like, she's a fat lady.
Yeah. And it's as much about him as it is about her. Right. And going on his earlier, the women, if you watch that documentary, you'll see. But he describes this further in that where he says that he claimed that like after he got laid this first time, I think it was this time, he couldn't find his wallet. So he claims he yelled at her and said, "You bitch, you stole my wallet, blah, blah, blah." And she said, no, and went out crying. He kicked her out. And then he's looking around the room and there it is. And there's his wallet. And as he describes it, he goes down to the bar to try to find her, to apologize, walks in, and he asks the bartender for this woman by name. And he goes, "We can't serve you here." He gets kicked out of the bar because she's a regular, and she went and told the bartender what happened, and you're done, you're out. Right. So it has this almost like a Chaplin-esque quality of The Tramp, but rendered through a really like horrific American down and out, Skid Row aesthetic. He's on the move again, right? When he's telling these stories. Like a starving dog going from door to door.
And he's not just depicting a scene of being down and out. He is as despicable as anybody else in there, right? He's a member of this. This isn't anthropological.
Right. 100%. Yeah, and he in that interview he calls her poor old girl. He would say it's too much pathos for it to be just pornographic. I think that's a simple. Right. Yeah.
That's right.
All right, so good times. Moving on. We're getting to the early writing. When Hank was age 24, his short story Aftermath of a Lengthy Rejection Slip was published in Story magazine.
Right.
And that, okay, I got to give a little background on this. This is ad hoc, but the editor of that magazine would send him nice rejection letters, like real rejection letters, not form letters. Hey, keep trying, do this, personal letters. And the way he got this rejection was like, or this acceptance was in fact, hey, we regret to send you back these. However, we're accepting this one. And it is a story about the editor of that magazine. So it's a little meta. They didn't publish it in like the main part of the magazine. It was published sort of in the back, but it's a little bit of it's funny. And he caught the editor's eye by writing the editor into a story about getting a rejection letter from that editor. So fun.
Interesting. Yeah. That's interesting. That's an interesting creative decision, I would say.
Yeah. And very telling of his humor. Now, he got $25 for that, and that meant something.
Whoa. He got paid?
Whoa. Yeah, he got paid for his short story. Like
I've never even heard of this happening before.
It can happen. Yeah, Jason, Brad, and I haven't had the talk yet, so we got to be mindful. He still thinks Santa's real. He's delivering rejection letters, Brad. Santa.
That makes sense.
Yeah. But I mean, I remember reading in this book that he was eating like you could get a meal for 5 cents. So $25 at that time. And it was literally, he could eat off of that. Yeah. All right. So 2 years later, another short story, 20 Tanks from Castle Down, was published by the Black Sun Press in issue 3 of Portfolio, an Intercontinental Quarterly, which is a limited run, loose leaf broadside collection put out in 1946. His influences included John Fante, Knut Hamsun, Celine, Hemingway, Jeffers, Henry Miller, D.H. Lawrence, Dostoevsky, Du Fu Li Bai, who I don't know, and James Thurber. And do you have something on Hemingway, Jason, that you want to talk about and his influence on Hank?
I do. So he talks about this even as a child in Ham on Rye, where he mentions that, and I closed out of that tab. Well, I'll just recount it, where he talks about how Hemingway was a lodestar in terms of both opening his eyes to what literature can be and stylistically what literature is. And I want to talk about that because I think this goes back to what Brad was saying earlier about that sense of reporting that that carries through Bukowski's work. I don't think that Bukowski's style as a poet relates directly to a poetry tradition. I think Bukowski's style as a poet relates directly to these early century short story writers that he's reading, particularly Hemingway. The old truism of the short declarative subject, verb, direct object sentences that Hemingway supposedly sort of molded into fiction is exactly what Bukowski is doing with his poetry. He's writing very declaratively. He's writing very directly. He's writing with a lot of action verbs, all of those old saws of journalism. And I think it's really interesting that one of the few classes that he did take at LA City College was in journalism. So he sort of has this, this background as to how to form language like that. And I think that it really shows. And I think that Hemingway is definitely, he writes poetry as if Hemingway wrote poetry. And go ahead, Kevin.
No, I think that's it. I think you nailed that. I hadn't really thought about it, but yes, and he writes in the vernacular. He's not putting on airs. He's very direct. He doesn't use a word that's more inflated than the word he needs.
Right.
And he also isn't afraid to just tell you a good story.
Right.
Like one of the poems he reads in that documentary is about going to the track, having to have a beer shitting, and losing his wallet in the crapper.
Right.
But trying to get his money in for the race. Yeah. And at the last minute, he gets the soggy bill in for his horse. And then the horse, nothing comes of the horse. The horse runs out anyway. Yeah. Right. And you could draw a little, it's like the kind of story somebody would tell you at a bar.
Yeah. For sure.
Right. But
in the list of influences you rattled off, I don't remember them exactly. I think the only actual person in there known for their poetry is Robinson Jeffers.
Right.
If I remember the list right there, the rest of them were all novelists and short story writers. So it's possible he wasn't even really reading poetry.
Well, and he was largely writing stories, and then we'll come to it. But a little later, he had he became very ill. He had an ulcer and ended up in the hospital. And it was only after coming out of the hospital, having felt like he nearly died, that then he sat down and it all came out poetry. Yeah. He describes it like it came out of him that way. He didn't try. He didn't think in the hospital, oh, I'm a poet now. It just sort of happened is how he described it. But we got to,
No, go ahead.
I was just going to say, we've got to get on to kind of the first great love of his life, Jane Cooney Baker. So I'm going to read a little bit here. Late in 1946, he wandered around the country. His wanderings came to an end. Even though he liked the bar scene in Philly, LA was where he belonged. He continued drinking as heavily as during the war years and occasionally wrote a short story. One of the bars he frequented, the Glenview on Alvarado Street, became like a second home. You're a real drinker. You get a bar that's, On a hot summer night, walking along Alvarado, one could easily deliriously mix palm trees and half-dilapidated storefronts with the humidity and the dark, long dream of L.A. So one evening, he's at this bar, and he sees an older woman sitting by herself. He glanced at her, turned away, jingled the change in his pockets, and found himself looking back again, noting her blonde hair and mournful blue eyes, with the slightest hint of pouches forming under them, and a way of gesturing that told him she had once been a very classy person. She must have been a real beauty, he told himself. A sense of lost glamour and an aura of good things long gone radiated from her. Oddly enough, no one had approached her. One guy sloshed the whiskey around in his shot glass while two veterans of the LA night huddled in drunken conversation. Normally, one or another would have introduced themselves to an unescorted female. Curiosity led Hank to ask the bartender why no one talked to her. Because she's crazy, he said. Hank ordered a drink and moved over to the unoccupied stool next to her. The woman looked straight ahead, not acknowledging his presence. He stared into his drink, then at the mirrored wall and back to his drink. I hate people, don't you? She said. He told her that it wasn't so much hatred as not wanting to be around them. He ordered 2 scotch and waters. Listen, he said, what do you do? I drink. He smiled. And then he went on to say, I'm out of money. You really don't have any money? No money, no job. Come with me, she said. And then they go down. And this is recounted in Barfly, I think, sort of almost like line for line. And this is how he picks up Jane Cooney Baker. And I'll read a little bit more just to give you a picture of who she was. This was his first great love. Jane Cooney Baker's history was soon revealed to Hank. She came from Carlsbad, New Mexico, and was 10 years older than him. Age gap.
Mhm.
We got another one coming the other direction later.
Mhm.
Her well-to-do mother had been too busy with her social life to be burdened with caring for her child. At an early age, she found herself in an orphanage operated by an order of nuns. While there, she and the other girls would jump out of the dormitory windows at night and run to the vegetable garden to dig up radishes because they were served very little food. She had no friends to speak of, but when she was 18, Jane met a wealthy young man from Connecticut by the name of Baker. Hank doesn't know the circumstances of how they met, but believes it must have been in a cocktail lounge. They married, had 2 children, and lived a life of luxury for several years. Hank seems to recall hearing Jane say that her husband was an attorney with a flourishing practice, at least in the beginning. Unfortunately, he turned into an alcoholic and brought Jane along with him. The marriage ended up failing, and she lost her kids, and they soon began living together. And that was, so we got to have a little bit of Jane because she'll figure heavily, not just in his life in terms of love, but also he would write poetry to her. All right, so let's get a little more. Failing to break into the literary world, he grew disillusioned with the publication process and quit writing for almost a decade, a time that he referred to as a 10-year drunk. These lost years formed the basis for his later semi-autobiographical chronicles, and there he fictionalized versions of himself through an alter ego, Henry Chinaski, right? Most of his fiction, if not all of it, is kind of like more or less autofiction. Like the novels anyway.
Right.
Some of his short stories are very, very funny. He's got a short story in what is it? I've got it right here. Hot Water Music. That's just about 2 absolute like assholes. I think it's like a painter and a sculptor, or it's 2 painters, and they just go out and they're just insufferable. But because they're getting a little bit of fame, people, women throw themselves at them, and it's very, very funny. Easy to read, but there's a little more depth to it than meets the eye. So during this period, he continued living in LA, working at a pickle factory for a short time. If you want to see Bukowski laid onto film, the one to watch, you almost can't get Barfly streaming right now, at least when I looked. Yeah, it's hard to find. You have to get it on like Blu-ray or whatever. But Factotum, are you familiar with that one? Have you seen that, Brad?
Is that the one with Matt Dillon?
Yeah.
Yeah, I have seen that. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's good. It's good. Other than the fact that you make this handsome man stands in for Bukowski. But other than that, it's pretty good. Yeah.
I feel like it, captures the spirit of it pretty well. It's pretty amusing. And it was shot in the Twin Cities. You can see it's right here in Minneapolis, St. Paul.
Okay.
There's even an unfortunate jump cut where he's driving around downtown Minneapolis, and they jump cut to downtown St. Paul, as he says. I found out she had a job as a chambermaid downtown, and I'm like, that's a different downtown. You're not fool. I had my day. Anyway, yeah, that's all right. We'll give him a pass. It's actually a pretty good movie, and it's interesting because he's such an LA writer, and they don't really. And he even mentions LA City College when he tries to get a journalism job in that film. But there's something about the Twin Cities that it works for that film. It feels right. In any case, so he goes on this 10-year drunk, and he works at a pickle factory, which you can see in the film Factotum. And he would roam around a little bit, rooming houses. Now, in the early 1950s, he took a job as a fill-in letter carrier with the post office in LA, but resigned just before he reached 3 years service. In 1955, he was treated for a near-fatal bleeding ulcer. After leaving the hospital, he began to write poetry. And this is sort of the gap between Jane, who we just described, and the woman who would become his first wife, Barbara Fry. So let me take you into the hospital a little bit. After an uncomfortable night, a nurse finally appeared. Hank was taken for an x-ray. A mad scene ensued when she was too weak to stand upright for the technician. After 2 attempts at getting a proper x-ray, the technician told the nurse to take Hank away. He had just wasted 2 negatives. He told Hank that the film cost a lot of money and he didn't want to waste any more. All through this, his pain intensified. Surrendering to the situation seemed like the best course to take, but when he was taken into a new ward, he rebelled against the nurses who seemed oblivious that he was suffering. He kept spitting up blood, much of it on the floor because he could not always make it to the bathroom in time. A nurse finally came to his bed and yelled at him for making her job difficult. He responded with a nasty comment, after which the nurse lifted his head and slapped him across the face a couple times. "Florence Nightingale, I love you," he told her. One of the nurses told him that they could not give him any blood because he didn't have any blood credits. "You have a bleeding ulcer," she said, "and it is very serious." The nurse then asked if he wanted to see a priest. He had told the admissions clerk that he was a Catholic. Good man. Hank remembered his father boasting about giving blood to the county's blood bank, so Hank gave the nurse his father's name and phone number. 2 days later, Hank was given a massive blood transfusion. It was a mad scene. I really thought I was dying, but my gracious father decided to spare my life. After the transfusion, a priest visited Hank's bedside. Hank informed the priest that his services were not needed, not because Hank thought he would pull through, but because he had no faith in God. Jane came to the hospital with Hank's father. Henry stood off to one side smiling as Jane stumbled drunken across the room to Hank. "Lover, oh lover boy," she said. Hank accused his father of deliberately getting Jane drunk before coming for the visit. "I know what you've done," Hank said. "It was on purpose to prove a point." "Lover, don't you want to see me?" Jane went on. Henry showed no sympathy for his son. He said, "I told you she was no good." Hank answered, "You son of a bitch. One more word out of you and I'm going to take this needle out of my arm and get up and whip the shit out of you." Then Hank told them both to leave. The next morning, he was released from the hospital. A nurse gave him a list of foods to eat. A doctor told him he would die if he drank. Just before Hank left, another doctor recommended an operation. "You're out of your mind," Hank said. Home from the hospital, he found it difficult to return to his post office routine. He couldn't take it anymore. For years, he had been persecuted by a supervisor whose every word and deed could be found in the postal regulations. Hank stood out as the rebel, the man to break. But when he didn't knuckle under, this company man began writing him up with increasing regularity and sending him out on the most difficult assignments. So he resigns, and then soon afterward, sat down at his typewriter, long unused, and began typing out poems. He didn't know where they came from, and we've got some of these poems to read. I'm excited. He didn't know where they came from, but believed they were probably spurred on by his near brush with death. It was some kind of madness. I didn't even think about what I was going to write. It was just automatic. This unexpected, totally unplanned reaffirmation of his writing excited him. For a moment, he thought of writing stories again. This didn't happen. The poetry came too fast, and each one made such a complete final statement that he no longer had the desire to venture into prose. At the same time that the poetry burst forth, Jane introduced him to the racetrack in the belief that it would take his mind off liquor. When she mentioned going to Hollywood, that's maybe not, that's maybe not. I don't. They have liquor there, don't they?
Right.
I think they
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now, Charles, I think you should try crack. I'm not saying it's going to solve your problems. Yeah.
You got a gambling problem? Have you heard of crypto?
Right.
Right. Get your mind off of the casino gambling.
Yeah.
Let's talk about Litecoin.
Right.
Okay. Yeah, that's hilarious. He didn't even know what horse racing was. And she explained it, told him about betting. And he said, "Is there one open now?" "I think Hollywood Park is open. Let's make it," he replied. And, they would get there and he said, "Jesus, it sounds kind of stupid to me. All these people, mindless masses of people hovering together, watching these animals go around the track. I don't quite get it. Maybe something is wrong with me." But he picked 3 winners on his first trip. One of them paid $50. It seemed easy to him. And he went on a winning streak after that. And that only helped to increase his daily intake of liquor. So as we were chuckling, that didn't really work.
Yeah.
And he loved the track. He would go to the track, I think, all his life after that. He just thought it was great.